welcome, welcome. Welcome as you're coming in. So nice to see everyone's face. we, we see each other every morning, we see each other every week, and it's a wonderful community. And we do have visitors tonight, and those folks are more than welcome. So as you know, tonight we have Naomi Shihab Nye on the Pacific Zen Luminaries series, and Naomi will be sharing her poems with us. But first, what I thought we'd do is perhaps just meditate for about 5 minutes and let those who are coming in late to come in at that time. So let's sit with a very short poem of Naomi's, if that's okay. The beauty of yes, the beauty of no, shining moments, wearing different clothes. So welcome, Naomi Shihab Nye. Shooting star is Shihab, is that correct?
It is.
We are so happy to have you. It's so wonderful. And it was so nice. Allison and I spoke with you for about a half hour a week ago and got to know you a little bit better. But we've known you through your poetry. I have known you through your poetry for years. And Allison has known you in person and through your poetry for years. So you guys have been friends for a long time. And I'm just so pleased to have you here with us. And Allison will be co-hosting this call and offering probably far more than half of the questions and things to say. So Naomi is one of our premier poets, as you well know, I think, in the United States today. And what's so wonderful about her poetry is the intimate human quality that she brings to the most difficult issues, like political conflict, like domestic violence, like environmental issues. And she sees poetry, and we're going to hear more about this in a moment, I hope. She sees poetry as a refuge for our own human existence. How do we find the beauty of yes and the beauty of no? It's through poetry, she feels. And Allison, I want to hand off to you. Would you like to say anything as we introduce Naomi?
Well, first of all, I'm just so happy to spend the evening with Naomi, my dear friend. And when I was thinking about this, I was very struck, Naomi, by how when you went to university that you co-majored in both world religions and English. And so clearly your interest in the inner life and the deep questions have always been with you and in some way intertwined. And that was really, touching to me and beautiful. And it's in threaded through all your poetry, and also in the quality of your being and in your teaching when I've been with you all these years in the poetry workshops. So would love, we'll be so thrilled to be hearing more of that this evening.
Thank you, Allison and John. It was such a dear invitation to be asked to be with you all tonight. And I greet you all as friends, old friends, new friends, possible friends, always friends. And I feel very lucky to have spent so many summer days with Allison at Tassajara in California, and to know Zen Buddhism as a tremendous refuge for us. And I thank you for letting me be in your company. I've been thinking about the whole interest I've always had in religion a lot lately, because I've been writing about my mother who died on Thanksgiving. And I gave a little tribute about her at a local event recently. And it started with, my mother was a seeker all her life. And so was my father. They were from two sides of the world. My father was Palestinian Arab from a Muslim family in Jerusalem. My mother was German Swiss from a Lutheran family in St. Louis. And the two of them, nevertheless, decided at young ages that they did not want to practice the religions of their parents and families. And people were surprised later to hear that really that was much easier for my father. He suffered no anger from his family when he made that pronouncement, quite young, at the age of 12, I think. And my mother made it at the age of 18, and she suffered a lot. Her parents refused even to attend her own marriage or be very warm to her for years because she had made this decision to go out and seek and study other faiths, other paths. And I think one of the things that attracted these two very different people to one another was their curiosity about ways of being in the world, ways of doing, ways of seeing, and certainly belief systems, faith systems. In some regards, I think for all of my childhood, I think my father was much more interested in Christianity than my mother was, because she had had it sort of rammed into her from birth and said, no, I don't believe this is the only way, because the synod of Lutheranism that her parents belonged to was a very strict Missouri Synod part of Lutheranism. And since then, many Lutheran practitioners have told me, we're not all like that. We're not all as strict or as rejecting of others as that particular synod was, especially in those days, in the 1950s and early 60s. So I grew up with seeking parents, curious parents. They went to lectures. The great theologian Houston Smith was a very close friend of our family, and he encouraged them. He would write a book that we used in college as our text, World Religions Handbook. He encouraged them to keep seeking, and they were very attracted to Buddhism and to Vedanta, and they were just open-minded. So by the time I had grown up, hearing many things, attending Bible school in the summers, because my mother thought it was important for people to know Bible stories, have Christian references, but also going to the Vedanta every Sunday. There was a sense of curiosity they had passed on to me anyway. So by the time I was a religion major was when I really felt that the path which appealed most to me was Zen Buddhism, and that was my travel down that path of reading and thinking. So being open to many ways of seeing, I guess, was conducive to my life, which had already started as a poet too, very young. And, of course, with poetry, we're interested in perspective. Something happens. How do we see it? How does our neighbors see it? How does our family members see it? Everyone sees it a little differently. And it all went together for me. I never felt fractured or confused amongst the many possibilities. And, having a life with poetry is, I think, a very precious kind of attunement, because you believe from early childhood that details matter, that undersung, unobtrusive, subtle little happenings are exquisite and beautiful in their own ways. You are always looking around to see what's there. You don't wait for things to happen, really. You just wander around in a pleasant state of observation a lot of the time. I often feel that when I walk around my neighborhood. We live in the inner city, a very old neighborhood in downtown San Antonio. And just feeling, the movement of the river and knowing the histories that have passed through different houses and seeing the trees change over the years. All of this becomes a worthy context. It's the stuff of life that poets care about. And so the human stories and dramas that happen in the midst of everything we live amongst that doesn't belong to anyone in some ways. I often appreciate the sky the way that it belongs to all of us equally. And I've always appreciated those kinds of things, growing up on the Mississippi River and seeing that river go under the bridges and thinking about, Huck Finn and Mark Twain and all the people who had had relationships with that river, and seeing the boats go up and down the river. I mean, there was that sense of what belongs to everybody here. That's what I'm curious about. It was not a sense of what can I get or how much can I have or how big can my house be ever, but how much could I notice? And I remember as a child really thinking about a big life. How do you have a big life? And a big life had something to do with horizon. What was the span of your horizon? Was it a tight little, this is the only good neighborhood horizon, or was it a vast horizon that would have room for many people, many possibilities?
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Yeah. You've talked about poetry as a refuge, and we chatted about that, as I mentioned. Could you go into that? What is poetry as a refuge to you? And
Well,
what can it be? How can it be a refuge to others?
Well, one thing I always loved about poems is how concise they are. You can sit down, read a poem, and read it again, and not that much time will have passed. You can hold it, contain it, carry it in your pocket. Very different from a novel. I've been reading a novel I really love for the past 2 months, but for some reason, I'm reading it so slowly that I start feeling guilty toward the book. Like I need to move along here. But a poem you could hold, it could hold you. And the thing I've always noticed about a poem that you like is that it transforms your moment. Whatever you were thinking about, suddenly you're thinking about what's in the poem. It enters you in a very intimate way, but often a wide generic way. It could belong to many people at once, but an intimate way so that your mood could change, your vision could change. Suddenly your whole tilt on the day might alter. So to me, that is a refuge, to know that when you're feeling down or isolated or confused, complicated, when you're feeling complicated, I really think it can be a good time to go to poetry and find a poem which filters you, sifts through you somehow, holds you and clarifies you. And a poem just has the power to do that very, very quickly.
But we hear you read a poem to us, one of your poems, maybe The House of Rain or Sifter. Do you have some other ones, John, that you would wanted Naomi to read?
Yeah, we could launch into some of your heritage, which you were talking about, Gay Day 4, or My
Well,
Father and the Fig.
sure, I would love to read those, but I do think regarding this topic of how a poem could pull you in, I could maybe Sifter would be good
Okay,
there.
absolutely.
That's okay. So I like old-fashioned kitchen implements, and I have a very old stove. It's 1953 vintage in our kitchen, but I like the old-fashioned sifters where you actually sift with a little handle. I think they have them in like thrift stores these days. I think there's some modern kind, but because I worked in classrooms for decades with kids, encouraging them to write, I would always be thinking of different possibilities. So, and I would often try to use things that were common to many kitchens or many lives. like what's in the first room in your house when you walk in, or writing about family, or writing about a street. So this is called Sifter, and the truth is many kids did not know what a sifter was. So I started carrying one around with me. And I was writing this as if I were a 12-year-old, because I'd just been with a lot of them. When our English teacher gave our first writing invitation of the year, become a kitchen implement in 2 descriptive paragraphs, I did not think butcher knife or frying pan. I thought immediately of soft flour showering through the little holes of the sifter, and the sifter's pleasing circular swishing sound, and wrote it down. Rhoda became a teaspoon, Roberto a funnel, Jim a muffin tin, and Forrest a soup pot. We read our paragraphs out loud. Abby was a blender. Everyone laughed and acted giddy, but the more we thought about it, we were all everything in the whole kitchen. Drawers and drainers, singing teapot and grapefruit spoon with serrated edges. We were all the empty cup, the tray. This, said our teacher, is the beauty of metaphor. It opens doors. What I could not know then was how being a sifter would help me all year long. When bad days came, I would close my eyes and feel them passing through the tiny holes. When good days came, I would try to contain them gently, the way flour remains in the sifter until you turn the handle. Time. I was a sweet sifter in time, and no one ever knew. So it's a very simple poem. As you can tell from reading any of my poems, I prefer a very simple vernacular, and I like tangible objects. I like scenes. So hopefully you feel your own kitchen in that little poem.
What I loved about the poem, if I may, is we were all everything in the whole kitchen. We were all everything in the whole universe, this quality, you know. And time, I was a sweet sifter in time, and no one ever knew, you know. This just this sense of embodiment and being so much larger, you know,
Yeah.
than yourself.
And the secrecy of a metaphor. I mean, you could carry a metaphor in your mind, you know, what your mind is like, what you're like, what the world around you is like. You could carry it for days, for hours, and kind of refer to it. It could be a little compass point to help you look at things. I used to be very, very anxious, for example, when anyone would put on their program that I was giving a keynote. That just scares me. I don't like the word keynote, as I don't like the word lecture. And so I just started picturing my metaphor was just how our minds are filled with little keys, and then all the Post-it notes of our days. And so those two things were not fearsome. So that's what I picture now when someone says keynote, is just a little key lying on top of a pad of Post-it notes. So that's not scary, but it's secret.
Well, along that theme, how about walking down Blanco Road at midnight?
Sure, this is a very much older poem, and I still feel connected to it, though. I mean, I feel as if I understand the impulse that led to it, and I feel it is that time in yourself, in your day. And I think many of us have had times like this since the whole COVID pandemic started in March 20, when was that? 2020, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So so there's that sense of being in solitude in some way that is also large. Walking down Blanco Road at midnight, there is a folding into the self, which occurs when lights are small on the horizon and no light is shining into the face. It happens in a quiet place. It is a quiet folding. It is like going to sleep in the comfortable family home. When everyone goes to sleep, the house folds up. The windows shut their eyes. If you are inside, you are automatically folded. If you are outside, walking by the folded house, you feel so lonesome, you think you are going crazy. You're not going crazy. You are beginning to fold up in your own single way. You feel your edges move toward the center, your heart like a folded blanket, unfolding and folding in with everything contained. You feel you do not need anyone to love you anymore because you already feel everything. You feel it, you fold it. And for a while now, it will quietly rest. I still think of that something about folding every time I drive past the spot on that street where, because I already lived in this city at the time that poem was born, where that poem started kind of emerging. I think that's interesting with writing too, that often you could be somewhere where an image came to you or a thought came to you, even if it was just a fragment, and your impulse of affection for that spot has stayed with you. I certainly have a feeling of almost bowing down at gate A4 in Albuquerque anytime I pass by it. And I've passed by it many times since. Yeah.
Can we have you read that
Sure,
for us?
sure. And, I think something to say about this one is that it's written as prose, actually. It's more like a little prose paragraph poem. And certainly, this is, people have asked me, is this, invented? No, this is completely non-fictional. Every bit of this is non-fictional. And I made sure of that. I wrote it down that night before my memory would start elaborating on it. And when this started happening, I had no sense that it was a story in the making. It was just a distraction or an oddity. I had no sense this is something to be written about, or that I will write about, or anyone would write about. And I think that's interesting to remember about our days, that many things we live through just in the course of a day, if written, could take on, there's that little phrase, shining moments. They could become more shining if you focused on them enough to write them. So my one great regret about this piece is I did not get my new friend's address or phone number, so I could never send it to her. And I would have. I mean, I don't think she couldn't have read it, but her son could have translated it. Gate A4. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal, after learning my flight had been detained 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing. Help, said the flight agent. Talk to her. What is her problem? We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this. I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly. Shudawa, shubiddik habibti. استنى شوي من فضلك شو بتسوي؟ the minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, "You're fine. You'll get there. Who's picking you up? Let's call him." We called her son. I spoke with him in English, saying I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons just for fun. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took up 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling about her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled a sack of homemade mamoul cookies, little powdered sugar, crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, from her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo. We were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free apple juice from huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country traveling tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones and thought, this is the world I want to live in, the shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying of confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. So thanks for listening to that slightly longer piece. I have felt very heartened and encouraged by people's response to that. I have also received shipments of mamoul in the mail and delivered from people I barely knew, which has been pleasant also. It's been a path of, I would say it's an intention of connection that so many of us carry. Something unexpected happens and you wish it were otherwise. None of us wanted to wait 4 extra hours, but then something good happens, something very touching. I mean, I had never felt that close to all the people at an airport gate in my life. So it became a real bonding kind of delay.
Naomi, I've probably read that and seen you read it, and it's been in articles probably a dozen times. And each time it just shines just so beautifully. It's sort of like a Zen koan where it's got such a deep humanity and a deep intimacy of truth. And it's so, for me, emblematic of how you take on these intractable world problems, through this intimate quality of human experience. And thank you for that. It's really lovely.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say, John. And well, we're all given stories, and I just read a fantastic memoir where someone also talks in her book about unstories. I mean, we have some stories that we carry with us. We wish to unstory ourselves, like release those stories because they're burdens or they're difficult, they're hard. But many of the stories that we carry end up giving us much more than we could have imagined at the moments they were happening. I remember in childhood, I had some friends who were fascinated by science fiction and fantasy. And I looked at them in wonder because I used to think, how do they have time for it? I'm so completely caught up in everything that's really happening. I can't even imagine wanting to like dream that I'm on another planet all the time. I just don't, I don't know. Where do they get that energy? This planet is so full of magic that it will be enough for me. I knew that early on.
Well, I was very touched by the last line, not everything is lost,
Yeah,
and how despair is so much predicated on the belief and the certainty that when some dark something happens, that it's all the beauty and human connection is sort of turns to ash, and that somehow the poem is letting us know that beauty isn't canceled out by the dark parts of life.
right. Yes. And also the terrible stereotypes that are promoted by sorrowful things that happen in the news, in the world that we see. Um, some people have commented to me that it's amazing that, an Arab woman would be able to have every other woman in a gate except a food she offered. But, that touched me as a point of, kind of stereotyping that I had just thought of anyone offering a food that everyone accepts suddenly is is a blessing. Um, yeah, we're living in a world of many divisions. I mean, we're all so acutely aware of it in our nation. I am definitely acutely aware of it in my state, and we have to keep hoping that there can be some places where not everything is lost, where as humans we care about each other, come together, and yeah. If you like, I could read since we were talking about refuge, the piece I just found this morning from the writer who lived in Uvalde, Texas.
Mm.
Can I throw that
Yeah,
in here, John?
please.
Yes, for the past 3 years, my writer friend Marion Winnick, who lives in Baltimore, and I have been editing a book, which is a collection of writings by our friend Anne Alejandro, who was born in Uvalde, Texas, and was there most of her life, went away to college and then and graduate school and came back and lived and taught in Uvalde. And at the age of 32, she was diagnosed with very, very acute chronic fibromyalgia and lived in a state of terrible pain for 32 more years. And she was a devoted writer, a big reader, a teacher for as long as she could be. But unfortunately, she was really consumed in a way by the pain she suffered. And so, although she wrote thousands of pages to her friends and family, uh, she only had one chapbook of poems published during her lifetime. And shortly before she died, Marion and I promised her that we would create a book out of the thousands of pages we had of her writing. So we've been working on it for 3 years. And when we started working on it, half the people, even in Texas, didn't know where Uvalde was. And now everybody in the nation knows where Uvalde is. And the people in Uvalde feel quite sad about that. But this morning, I'm going through like my last 200 pages before we turn our book in. And I found this little segment. And so because I think land is often our refuge, just going out onto land, open land, looking at land and sky is a refuge. And a poem on a page is like its own little land, often contained on that one page. So this is called Uvalde to Brackettville in September, which is another town out there. And it's 80 miles west of me from here. This just seems prescient, and so we're going to include it. The land forgot it was the end of summer and looked like April. Spread before me a banquet of the spring that didn't end. A hard land for hardy people has few mercies and no memory, but I store its treasures up to sustain me. Thick grass, wahilos uncurling, blooming cenices. I am of hardy people formed by this hard land that's soft and nourishing now, a band of unhardened survivors. Some land I know is always home. It claims you, and the people who see it in your bones, the way you carry yourself, the way you stoop and smile and almost cry, the way your eyes scan the sky and know what it means. It takes you in. It dusts you off. It spreads out the banquet. It's America, right? What can happen? Well, I find that last line a little haunting now. But I was very touched by the idea of how staring into the sky dusts you off and spreads out a banquet. I mean, that's definitely what that large sky out there, even larger than here, does. So to feel in a piece of writing, almost a sense in how she keeps talking about, in many of her pieces, survivors, hardy, we're going to have to be survivors. Very haunting to us now.
Yeah, that's very, very touching.
Again, that's by Anne Alejandro. And her book, which is coming out, is called Look Closer, The Writings of Anne Alejandro. And now we are putting in the subtitle of Uvalde, Texas, which we were not before.
Can we visit The House Made of Rain, perhaps? This is really great poem. I don't want to comment on it before we hear it, but
well, as I told you, Jon and Allison, no one has ever asked me to read this before, and I don't think anyone's ever even made a comment on it before. But I would send this out to anyone who had places in your family home, your first home, or any home, your current home, that were hard to share or to talk about. And so this is called The House Made of Rain. Our voices poured out through a hole in the floor. Some days the woman with a bucket came swaggering up the block, singing our names, the song that goes, old, old, very old. And we rode in her wake, echoing the thrum of her lowest note. At night, the houses would tilt like small boats on the Mississippi, and we fell away from one another, deep, deep, very deep. And I dreamed I held a hand after the person who owned it was dead. Already, I felt the press of currents, the taunt of a word like blend. Our school herded us to the confluence of rivers. I expected to see purple pouring into blue, but just a subtle gray mingling. I folded my arms. They should see my house, I thought. They should stand on the porch one afternoon and hear what goes on. In my house, tears welled up from underground pools, shadowy streams we rode from room to room, paddling. Sometimes my brother pulled me out, though he had been premature and took a long time to grow huge. A girl in my class said she had never seen her parents sad. I wanted to drown in her life. A floor furnace we had to leap over or burn our feet. A barrel where we lit what we wanted to lose. A red stove that has followed me like a dog. That house still floats among houses where neighbors used crutches, measured hems. Thrum, thrum from the bottom of the lung. The tornado that razored away whole blocks might be coming back. I rode my rocking horse hard as I could to escape and threw up. Mama stroked my back. I told you to slow down, she said. We were huddled in a hall. I told you, take it easy. Next time, she said, could you please listen? You know, in the days when I grew up, and this is a poem I've been working with, I don't think I knew the word depression, and I don't think people use that word. And so if someone suffered it, what did they call it? Well, they didn't call it anything. They mostly hid it, I think. And so my mother, who had suffered acute depression from her childhood, and my father, who was a refugee in exile, very homesick all the time, had this kind of, they each had their own, as wonderful and open-minded and beautiful cultured people as they were, they each kind of had their own cloud of sorrow that they walked around in. And my father combated his by being the friendliest, most extroverted person in Ferguson, which is the part of St. Louis I grew up in. So I truly understand what the people of Uvalde are going through in terms of community reputation. And my mother, though, had this terrible, terrible depression that was never named, was never explained, was never really talked about, except that it was constantly recurrent. And I will throw out there that miraculously, at the age of 85, she got over it for the next 9 years, the last 9 years of her life. She did not have it at all. And she considered that a miracle. And of course, by that time, you know, everybody had been to therapists, everybody talked about depression openly. There were thousands of books on the topic, but when she was growing up back in the 30s, 40s, it was taboo in a way to admit it. So The House Made of Rain is, you know, kids growing up in a house that they love. There's mixtures happening, but there are also mysteries that they cannot cure. And that tends to be true for a lot of children.
Yeah. You know, I see in everything comes next that you don't have a lot about your mom. We'll visit a poem, hopefully your mom, when your mom threw away your dad's ties. But you do write about her in Castaway, which is a more recent book. Right. And so it seems like maybe later in her life, and I guess she passed away in November, but you were able to write about her more.
Well, she told me as a child not to write about her. She said, write about anything. I mean, she knew I was writing all the time. And she said, don't write about anything you want, but don't write about me. So I honored that, you know, till I was in my 50s, I guess. And then she sort of started saying, why don't you ever write about me? And then, so now I'm working on a whole book about her.
Oh, that's so great.
They'll make it up to her. Yeah.
Your father, on the other hand, Aziz Habib, he figures very, very strongly and deeply in your poetry. And the one that I love the most was My Father in the Fig Tree, which to me speaks so much to your relationship with your father and to your heritage.
Well, this is for all the figs just now coming ripe. Yes, figs. Yes, he was quite loving about this food source. And of course, it's a very common food source in many countries around the world, and a hardy tree, and he loved it very much. My father and the fig tree. For other fruits, my father was indifferent. He'd point at the cherry trees and say, "See those? I wish they were figs." In the evenings, he sat by our beds, weaving folk tales like vivid little scarves. They always involved a fig tree. Even when it didn't fit, he'd stick it in. Once Joha was walking down the road and he saw a fig tree. Or he tied his donkey to a fig tree and went to sleep. Or later, when they caught and arrested him, his pockets were full of figs. At age 6, I ate a dried fig and shrugged. "That's not what I'm talking about," he said. "I'm talking about a fig straight from the earth, gift of Allah, on a branch so heavy it touches the ground. I'm talking about picking the largest, fattest, sweetest fig in the world and putting it in my mouth." Here he'd stop and close his eyes. Years passed. We lived in many houses. None had fig trees. We had lima beans, zucchini, parsley, beets. "Plant one," my mother said, but my father never did. He tended garden half-heartedly, forgot to water, let the okra get too big. What a dreamer he is. Look how many things he starts and doesn't finish. The last time he moved, I got a phone call. My father in Arabic, chanting a song I'd never heard. "What's that?" "Wait till you see." He took me out to the new yard. There, in the middle of Dallas, Texas, a tree with the largest, fattest, sweetest figs in the world. "It's a fig tree song," he said, plucking his fruits like ripe tokens, emblems, assurance of a world that was always his own. I think about what are our totemic trees, fruits, objects on earth, and many times they're things that come from childhood. The poet Robert Bly used to say, often in our dreams or our poems, we return to the trees of our childhoods, not the trees that are in our backyards right now. And I'm not sure that's always true. I think sometimes we dream of the close by trees, but I think it's a pleasure to think about how we've all had these sort of totemic or insignia kind of emblems in our family stories passed down to us. We've created our own, passed them on. Once when I went to work at a school in Delhi, in India, the kids each greeted me with a poem with a title something like "My Papa and the Sandalwood Tree," or "My Auntie and the Bougainvillea." And it was just so marvelous. They all were just holding the poems out before one word had been exchanged. And so I suggested that like 5 or 10 of them stand up and read their pieces. And by the time they finished reading, I felt close to their families, close to their vocabularies, their classroom. It was just such a beautiful thing, as if we created a garden in that room by just invoking plants loved in their own families.
Oh, so nice. I love the line, "I'm talking about a fig from the earth, a gift from Allah, a gift of Allah, on a branch so heavy it touches the ground." And I can feel that branch just groaning, in its fruit.
Right. Well, even though he wasn't a practicing Muslim, all my life, my father said, so many things were gift of Allah. He would just bring it up. Or sometimes he'd say it loudly, like in a grocery store. When something appeared in season again, he'd say, "Ah, gift of Allah." And people would turn their heads.
He, can you tell us a little bit about his experience? I guess he was about 20 years old when he came
Yes, he
to
was
this country.
about 20. He
Uh-huh.
had an interesting childhood because he began working for the BBC at the age of 14, actually reading the evening news. And I didn't really believe that when I was 14. I used to say, "Dad, nobody's going to hire me to read the evening news." And he was doing it on radio, BBC radio in Jerusalem at the time. And but it was true because I ended up seeing him. There's a documentary called The Wall about Jerusalem going back into the 30s, 40s. And he's in it reading the evening news, a tiny little teenager. And I just couldn't believe when I actually was watching.
Was it, may I ask, was it English or Arabic he was reading in?
No, he was reading in English.
English,
And he started,
wow.
yes, people often don't realize that most people in the Middle East are bilingual and do speak English. I mean, it's very common people speak English in the Middle East, unlike in China and Japan, where you can walk for miles and not find anyone who speaks English. But in the Middle East, kids start learning it. I think it used to be taught from 4th or 6th grade on, but in his case, it started at 1st grade for some reason in the school he was in. And these days in Gaza, I know it's taught from 1st grade on. So people, often look at those kids in the news and don't realize they probably speak English. But anyway, he took this job and felt very interested in what was out there. I think if you're a kid working on radio and you have that experience of your voice is going out there, what is out there? And he was the only one amongst his brothers, there were 5 of them at the time, who wanted to immigrate. And so and especially after the creation of the state of Israel in 1948, and his family lost their home, and they did not move to a refugee camp. They moved to a small village in the West Bank where my grandmother would live out her life. And this was very tragic for my father because he had grown up in Jerusalem, the old city, with so many Jewish friends, and he had no sense whatsoever that Arab people and Jewish people should be in conflict. That just didn't make sense to him. And same with Greek people, Armenian people, all the many people who lived in Jerusalem and in all the religions. So that to him was like a big backsliding that was occurring, that now we're going to be pitted against one another. Now someone else is in our house. How could they do that to us? How could they seize our family money in the bank? And people often don't really know what happened to the Palestinians in that story, but it's worth knowing about. Dr. Edward Said wrote a lot about it. But the rest of his family moved to this village, and he said he was going to apply for a scholarship, and he would go to England or the United States or wherever he could get a scholarship. So when he was received the scholarship to go to the United States, they said, "Where would you like to study?" And he said, "Oh, just send me to the middle," thinking that he would have access to both coasts. And they sent him to Kansas.
And he was a journalist his whole life, I guess.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
But he turned into a newspaper journalist, not radio. And he was fascinated by news. And he was particularly worried about the sides of every story that were never told. I would say that was one of his obsessions as a journalist. How can we hear more about this story from more viewpoints? Who are we not paying attention to in this story? And he would often write little kind of op-ed features on that topic. And also he worked tirelessly his entire life, giving talks literally up till the time of his death about possibilities for hope and peace in Israel, Palestine. Why not? It should be that way. And he just felt so saddened that it was a fractured land. And I have thought over the past years since he died, what would he think about the United States and how openly fractured it feels right now?
Could you read us the poem, My Father's Tie?
Oh, yes. Mom gives away your ties. Yeah. So it's always hard when loved ones die, what to do with everything. And yeah. Mom gives away your ties. Just last week, nearly 3 years since you flew from your miserable, precious body, I buried my face in your ties, the dark blue Peruvian with the little white llama. They seemed comfortable together, still hanging on the inside of your closet door, mark of a man, family of shiny colors and stripes, journalist, diplomat ties, ties that said, we will be hopeful in the workplace, even when we hate what we are doing, or cologne helps a man survive. Fragrant still as your cheek every morning of my own young world. I thought of taking some, but liked them there in place where you left them. So today, when I heard they'd been given to a raggedy swap shop near a lake, I had to stand outside a long time in the huge air, your one real home for all the days you walked among us. And of course, I didn't even think about, ties with its multiple meanings when I wrote that, giving away like my tie to him through the ties I remembered, or our ties to our jobs. My father always thought the uniform of the American dressed man, well-dressed man, was odd. He used to talk about like, why this straight tie or this little bow tie? I mean, why not something more flamboyant, or why not more possibilities? Why these few things that men are allowed to wear to be considered, dressed properly for work? And of course, he'd grown up in a place where men wore all kinds of things, keffiyehs, and when he was growing up, a lot of people in Jerusalem still wore a red fez, all kinds of garb. So for him, he was curious about how people dressed, and so the ties took on more meanings after the poem was written, and I started thinking, his ties to work, his ties to the Western world, our ties to him. Yeah.
I love the line that I stood outside in the huge air.
Yeah.
It has a marvelous moment in the poem where
Oh, thank you, Allison.
the experience that you were having it was almost like it was too large for your own body to contain, and so the sky itself had to hold it for you.
It was, and at so many critical times in his own life, when he was really suffering pain, anguish over the news, and he used to talk about, it's hard to be in the business of news and have to keep up with the news when the news is so painful all the time. And of course, he always wanted to start the fully 100% good news, yes, newspaper that was beautiful stories. But that's what he would do. He would go outside of the house and stand and stare into the sky. I saw him do that my whole life, wherever we lived. And and he used to do it. He would tell me he would leave the newspaper buildings that he worked in at lunchtime and often just go, buy something small to eat and then just go and stand and stare at the sky, not sit inside a restaurant, but just stare at the sky and have a little lunch just to feel cleansed of all that news that journalists have to filter and work with.
Children have been large in your life. As a teacher, you had a child yourself, of course, and you as a child, and you're the poet laureate of young person's poet laureate, right? Poetry.com. There's some beautiful poems about children that you've written. Wedding Cake, and then could you read that one and then Paint a Donkey and tell us the story about Paint a Donkey?
I think Wedding Cake is one of my favorite poems. If I had to pick a favorite, I don't know why. I guess again, it's an unexpected story. It's something you don't anticipate. You're kind of the passive observer in the story, and then suddenly you realize it was a story. After it's happened, you see it suddenly as a little compact story gift that was given to you. I do think these things happen to us all the time, and writing them changes them, because you're able to leave out the extras, what you don't want to have in, and just focus on where's the real spine of this story. And so coincidentally, this does also happen with an airplane involved. Wedding Cake. Once on a plane, a woman asked me to hold her baby and disappeared. I figured it was safe, our being on a plane and all. How far could she go? She returned 1 hour later, having changed her clothes and washed her hair. I didn't recognize her. By this time, the baby and I had examined each other's necks. We had cried a little. I had a silver bracelet and a watch. Gold studs glittered in the baby's ears. She wore a tiny white dress, leafed with layers, like a wedding cake. I did not want to give her back. The baby's curls coiled tightly against her scalp, another alphabet. I read, new, new, new. My mother gets tired. I'll chew your hand. The baby left my skirt crumpled, my lap aching. Now I'm her secret guardian, the little nub of dream that rises slightly but won't come clear. As she grows, as she feels ill at ease, I'll bob my knee. What will she forget? Whom will she marry? He'd better check with me. I'll say once she flew dressed like a cake between two doilies of cloud. She could slip the card into a pocket, pull it out. Already she knew the small finger was funnier than the whole arm. We were on a flight to Saudi Arabia, and the mother was wearing her full hijab when she came back, which is another reason I didn't quite see her as the same Western-looking person who had handed me the baby. And originally in the first draft of the poem that was in there, but then I thought it got too confusing and people were going to make a big cultural deal out of it. And in terms of the whom will she marry, he'd better check with me.
I like that.
Saudi Arabia being a more traditional marrying, arranged marriage kind of place. But I thought that's okay. It could still be funny, like you get your parental approval in any country, maybe, hopefully. But so I decided to comb that out of it. It just seemed like too much. But I have thought of that girl all through these years, and her sweetness, and I had never known anyone to wash their hair in a sink in a plane, but I guess it does happen.
And do you bob your knee once in a while
Well, I
in
do
memory
with
of this?
babies a lot, yes. And then I do when I think of babies, yes, I do. Bobbing a knee to calm down. That kind of, people talk about when you hold someone's baby that you sort of bounce a little bit to kind of keep the baby placid or centered, and yes. But thank you for even noticing that. And that poem, and we were talking when we were on our 30-minute phone call the other day about how poems sometimes crop up. This poem was written, the rough draft of it, on the back of an envelope while I was on hold waiting on a phone call. And you know how you get exhausted being on hold, so you just put the phone down and you just wait until you hear a voice come through. And so literally I scribbled the whole rough draft while on hold, just wanting to distract myself. And that little girl in that scene stayed with me. So, sometimes if you're in near proximity to an interesting anecdote that happened, and you don't have to have been a part of it. I mean, I was kind of just a sidekick to the story, just who knew that this woman could hand off her baby for so long. I couldn't imagine doing it.
Well, what's so marvelous about that is that the poem came to you while you were on hold, and also the baby came to you and you were on hold.
See, I never even thought of that, Allison. I was holding a baby and I'm on
waiting
hold.
and waiting. Where's the mother?
So maybe that's the trigger in the mind, the unconscious, that causes you to think of something at a given moment. It could have been that. Yeah, I've never thought of that. Thank you for that tip. Yeah.
Allison, should we go to Dear Vaccine?
Well, we want to hear the back
Donkey? Okay.
Donkey.
Okay.
Oh, the donkey. Yes. Okay. The donkey is a very quick poem. I think I can just say it. So this is called How to Paint a Donkey. Wait, I better look it up. And this is also an older poem that has stuck around in my consciousness. How to Paint a Donkey. She said the head was too large, the hooves too small. You could clean your paintbrush, but you couldn't get rid of that voice. While they watched, you crumpled him. Let his blue body stain your hands. You cried when he hit the can. She smiled. You could try again. Maybe this is what I unfold in the dark, deciding for the rest of my life, that donkey was just the right size. So that was actually something that happened in 4th grade and stayed in my memory. If you get a phobia about your art teacher when you're in elementary school, and then you always think of yourself as a bad artist. I've met so many kids over the years who said, oh, I'm not a good writer, because when I was in 3rd grade, my teacher said, I have bad grammar, bad handwriting, bad spelling. So that happened to me with visual art, because I had a teacher who was a realist. She wanted us to paint like Edward Hopper, not like Marc Chagall or Paul Klee. So I really had to struggle not to give her my work. I found out she was sharing my work in all the classes as the bad example. Don't do it like this. And so what happened with that poem that was such a wonderful gift to a poem is a writer in Scotland named Louise emailed me and said, would you mind if I sent that poem to 50 artists I know in Europe and invite them each to paint a quick donkey and send it to me, and make a website called How to Paint a Donkey, put your poem at the beginning and then the 50 donkeys. And I wrote back, well, I'm charmed. If you think you can really get 50 people to paint a donkey, feel free, do anything you like with it. And she did. She made this amazing website. And the donkeys were so fanciful, so adorable. And she said that she encouraged teachers in Scotland to use this in their art classes. Just they would look at the poem and then they would scan through all these different donkeys. I mean, many of them you would never have known were donkeys. They could have been any kind of dream animal. And I don't think the website is up anymore for some reason, but maybe there was some copyright issue with a few of the artists, but the artist liked it. She had a lot of response from the artists saying that they really liked being part of her project. And I just thought it was a beautiful thing to do. It was as if she took a poem to the next phase. She let the poem be a recipe, and then she took it into a bigger life. And I think she had a dream of making like a little brochure with that poem at the front and all the donkey paintings, but that never happened. You never know. This is what I've always told kids. You never know what'll happen if you let a poem go out. If you keep a poem in your shoebox under your bed, keep it in your drawer, it has a life with you, but maybe it doesn't get to have its own life. But if you let a poem be shared, it has its own life, or it could. And it could do many things you never even dreamed of.
How about one of your most powerful poems, the Dear Vaccine?
Oh, sure. Well, and this came from someone else's idea, David Hassler and Tyler Meyer, two wonderful poetry activists of our country. David runs the Kent State Poetry Center, and Tyler runs the Arizona Poetry Center in Tucson. They had this idea when the vaccine for COVID was coming into availability that maybe they should start a website to invite people to share experiences of what they've been through or how they felt about getting the vaccine, or just our shared strange years that we had been through, a year at that point. And so they asked me if I would write the model poem for their project. And first it was a website. Now, very quickly, it became an actual print book called Dear Vaccine. And there are also videos. If you go to dearvaccine.com or dearvaccine.org, I'm forgetting, you will be able to see the videos of many, many people saying their own poems. But the one that I wrote as their quick model is at the front of the book with an introduction. There are a couple introductions in the book. Save us, dear vaccine. Take us seriously. We had plans. We were going places. Children in kindergarten. So many voices in chorus. Give us our world again. Tiny gleaming vials, enter our cities and towns, shining your light. Restore us to each other. We liked our lives. Maybe we didn't thank them enough. Being able to cross streets with people we didn't know, pressing elevator buttons, smiling at strangers, standing in line to pay. We liked standing in line more than we pretended. It's a quick prick in the arm. You'll barely notice it. It's the gas in the car getting us going again. It's the turn in the road, face-to-face conversations someday soon. It's the hug, forever. It's the hug. Vaccine, please make the air clean. We went to yoga classes, deep collective breathing, in small rooms, in cities where we didn't even live. How brave we were. Vaccine, please restore our lives. Believe they were beautiful. So we've been extremely touched. We had 2,500 people on the website before we knew it. And then I think probably David Hassler had the idea, since he's at Kent State, that maybe we could pick some of our favorites and they could become a book. And then Kent State put the gas on to make it come out very quickly. And we've been happy because teachers have been using the book to encourage students to write and talk about their COVID experiences. And you know, some people are saying when COVID was over, but it's still not over at all. And we know that. My son has it for the 4th time, and at least 4 close friends in other cities have it right now. And so it's not over. And there is this sort of delusion that's taken hold of. My son's been vaccinated, boosted, and he's starting to think of himself as some kind of COVID magnet. And he wants never to have it again. But it's a shared experience we've had, much to our sorrow, but we know more. And so I'd say the book describes many, many life experiences, things we've learned more about. And there are so many we love that aren't in the book, but if any of you want, you could see the book. And here's one from Yahya Lababidi from Egypt. I feel you working in my body and want to work with you to be free of worry and stronger for others. Dear vaccine, teach us what to do next so that we might move on to the next level and be immune to thoughtlessness. So much self-examination went on during these days, these many days. Well, I don't know if you want me to read others, but
please, yeah.
We love them all. We love them all in here. Melanie Miller of Ohio. As I roll up my sleeve for you, dear vaccine, I pray, please save us from ourselves. Lindsay Mann in Michigan. Vaccine, please allow me to walk amongst strangers, to no longer dodge those I come across. It's little unexpected interactions with others that help to make us whole. And many people talked about their misgivings. And I'll just read one other one. Carrie Wimbish, North Carolina. I never thought I'd miss my nemesis, airport security. The line snaking around, stretched end to end, miles of cranky kids, tired travelers, dropped sippy cups, mouse ears, and where'd you put the passports? But I'm ready now, ready to board the plane to anywhere. A lot of shared experience. And
that's so lovely, Naomi. And tell us about, so you're editing your friend's the book from Uvalde. And then what else are you working on right now? What are you doing?
Well, I'm working on workshops that I do with kids. I'll be doing one at our children's museum this weekend around my trash book, picking up trash. They have a whole Dear Earth exhibition, environmental concerns, and so I'm excited about that one because
I have to admit that you got me picking up trash as I walk my dog now, Naomi. So
thank you.
Yes, you are changing the world.
Good, thank you. Well, a lot of people do it. I had no idea what a big problem it is in the Yukon, but they sent me their trash pickup t-shirt and I got to Zoom with trash picker uppers in the Yukon. And that was a lot of fun. And so working on different workshops, working on a healing poetry workshop for Uvalde Public Library to happen next week, and working on 2 books, Anne's book and my own mom book. And, you know, it just all the little things one does with poetry life. But I've always liked to keep many many different pots on the stove at once, kind of stirring them all and different things happening. And they're all interesting to me, and they all feed each other in a way.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think that there is a hunger that I felt. I know we're toward the end now and we haven't even had questions. That's worrying me. I talk too much, but there's been a hunger for this sense of voice, and more people, writing me about, I never knew how poetry could help me as it did during the past 2 years, or that it could give me a sense of others in an intimate, meaningful way that I was denied by losing a lot of my human society contacts. And so I think there's been a little different surge of curiosity for, hunger for, need for poetry. And it belongs to all of us. I like to talk about how it's here to serve us, how it's here to help us look at our lives. Reading, say, two of my favorite poets were William Merwin and W.S. Merwin and William Stafford, and also Robert Bly. I'm just thinking of those three. And they've all died now, and they help me I still feel so close to them through reading their voices, through all the wisdom they all gave us. Or people like Lucille Clifton or Mary Oliver, who continue to guide us with their incredible poems that you could read many multiples of times and always feel some new connection to them. And that's another thing we can love about poetry, that it calls out something different in us each time we read a poem. I loved the poet Elizabeth Coatsworth when I was a child. And recently, just due to the internet possibilities of the universe, I've become friends with the people who live in her house. And also her daughter, Kate Barnes, was the poet laureate of Maine, whom I actually got to be friends with in life. And Kate's work, Elizabeth's work, reading Elizabeth's work now and thinking, I read these poems when I was 7 and I loved them. And now they mean so much more to me. And I care about them even more. So it's okay and fine to go back to poems you loved when you were children, or books your grandfather gave you that you may never have cracked the covers of yet.
Well, we are getting towards the end. Allison, would you have any closing words or thoughts? And John, Tarek, please jump in.
Let's see, we haven't heard from John, so would you like to have any questions or anything to say, John?
I'm just happy. I I do notice how sticky metaphor is in your. It's like it comes through you from somewhere and then suddenly I think of all these memories I have, and they're all connecting to each other. And I remember my mother, my sister trying to get rid of my mother's shoes after she died, and she would put them out. And like this is your father's ties, obviously, but she would put them out just a little after the funeral. She would bag them up and put them outside to take away to somewhere. And my mother had a surprising number of shoes, and then in the morning they'd mysteriously be back in, and she did it several times. I said, "Well, Dad's bringing them back in," and things like. And so all the richness of you're wonderful about the small instance of life that makes everybody's life magic. So thank you. It's just
well, John, I'm so moved by your own writing. I love what I've read that you write is so much, and have a deep response to it. And I see in that image like the sense of your father wanting her to come back in. Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful image. Like you continue passing through the door. And yesterday something happened. I don't think I'll ever write about this, but I could say it at the close here. My mother hadn't, at the very end of her life, she didn't give me too many directions. She was a really good one about telling me directions, like do this, I want you to do that, could you go pick me up that. But right at the end of her life, she had one really specific person she wanted me to go visit and take something to, etc. And I finally did that yesterday. And while I was visiting this person, whom my mother had loved very much, I heard my phone dinging in my purse. And I took it out because it was a strange dinging that I'd never heard it make before. And it was when your phone gives you a little slideshow of pictures, photographs, and there's music attached to them. And they were all pictures of my mother smiling. And it was so stunning to me because, number one, I've never heard my phone make that sound before. And it's never called to me to watch a slideshow. I think I usually don't click on it or open it at that moment. But it was as if she was in the room. And my friend started weeping, her and her friend. And we felt she's in the room and this is how she's telling us. I don't think I could write about that, though, because I really don't know how to describe interactions with telephones. But thank you all for listening. I just feel sad that we don't have time for any questions. Couldn't we take one so I feel a little better?
Well, let me see. We have a few comments. Reminds me of my Polish neighborhood growing up, and all the websites are literal, including how to feed a donkey in Minecraft. Other than that, we have not gotten any chats.
You know, I don't know anything about Minecraft, but my grandson does. So that's interesting. Do they feed a donkey in Minecraft? May I ask Richard a question? What, do they have a donkey? Richard? Oh, well, thank you, Brenda. Maybe Richard will answer my question before we close, but I'd like to thank you, Allison, John, all of you for your generosity listening. You're so beautiful. I look to the state of California with longing since I'm living in the state of Texas. And I cherish your work and your presences and all you do. So thank you for your kindness and your beauty. And
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah.
Naomi, we always finish with a song.
Oh, yes.
So, because we do. And so here we go. It's Jordan.
So beautiful for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Naomi, once again. It's just so touching, your poetry, and thank you so much, your gift to humanity and providing refuge for all of us. It's really, really important, and you're doing it. So thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Jordan. Beautiful voice.
It's Jordan straight from Telluride, where he played on the main stage. So Telluride Bluegrass Festival. Congratulations on that, Jordan. And Allison, thank you so much for being a wonderful co-host, and Jon for coming in as a commentator. So